I was incredibly excited by the opportunity over the last couple years to be able to be engaged in a very rich dialogue with three fantastic architects about their vision for a new type of multi-faith space in the center of London called Friday, Saturday, Sunday. As you'll learn from the really rich, vibrant discussion that we've recorded for you, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is not just an idea for a building, but really an idea for a new paradigm for multi-faith and interfaith dialogue, where you have a space which is inhabited successively by three different religions. So it begins on a Friday as a space which is a mosque, and then the very same space gets transformed into a synagogue on a Saturday and a church on a Sunday. And what we hope is that in each of these encounters, there's room for people of different faiths to observe one another and remove some of that mystery and sometimes fear that is involved in encounters with people of other faiths and other cultures. In a moment, you'll listen to Martin Lewis. And Martin is, of course, an eloquent advocate of the capacity for intercultural and interfaith dialogue, and you can hear a little bit about his vision for why this project is so crucial right now and right in this place in London.
I think it is a really inspired concept. We encourage partnership in so many areas of life, from mergers to marriage. Why can't we actually bring religions together in one place? There's already real cooperation going on, I know, behind the scenes. So why not give that cooperation a visible, public, permanent manifestation? It's the next really important step towards bringing communities, and I mean all kinds of communities, together in all kinds of different ways. And I actually think you have got something special here in embryo. It won't probably work out exactly, precisely the way that you have planned, but I have just got that feeling that you will get there, and what you will end up with is something very, very special. Now, it won't be easy. There will, of course, be critics. And I, for many years, had a piece of paper pinned up, a saying pinned up on my study wall, which was the words of President Theodore Roosevelt, who was under attack in all kinds of ways by the media around about the start of the last century. And he said this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the person who points out how the strong man stumbles or how the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred with tears and sweat and blood, who errs and comes short again and again because there is no achievement without error and shortcoming, who, if they succeed, then know the triumph of high achievement, and who, if they fail, then at least fail while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who knew neither victory or defeat." And what you are trying to do here is truly, truly amazing. Now is the time for you to dare greatly, because if this comes off, it really will be a triumph of the highest achievement. So I wish you lots of luck with what you're doing. The momentum has been created here, and I wish you all the luck in the world, and may you succeed and may you triumph over all your opponents in the most spectacular way. Thank you very much indeed.
I'm an architect who is a Christian. Part of the work of my architectural practice is for church clients. I therefore add a strong Christian context to my religious work. That is to say, when I work for churches, I really feel I understand them, empathise. I wish them in my heart of hearts good luck and best wishes. Architecture, as many of you may know, nowadays is a very, very secular profession. It has therefore been a great pleasure and greatly enlightening to meet two other architects, Dan and Shahed, who feel exactly the same as I do about their own religious architectural work. Dan and Shahed and I have understood each other from the start. In our discussions about this project, none of us has ever veered away from our own fidelities, but because it is clear that we all work with these very strong convictions.
I've been working with Muslim communities mostly across London for the last 10 years, developing their places of worship and community facilities, from refurbishment and extensions to new buildings. Through this work, Identity, visual language and representation are continuously explored and experimented with. This history of religious endeavour in Britain is not exclusive to Muslims. Catholics, Jews, nonconformist Christians all built up their religious landscapes in similarly self-initiated and ad hoc ways. The practical pressures on mosques mean that they have had little time or resources to explore an aesthetic or experiential agenda. This project, a singular space for Christian, Jewish and Muslim prayer, offers many opportunities. For me, one of the most exciting is for the mosque to be temporarily released from the pressing practical needs of its communities and to celebrate beauty, aesthetics and coexistence, and to enter into a visual and symbolic dialogue with religious traditions with which it already has such an entwined and vibrant history.
I'm not just an architect, but I'm also a British and a Jewish architect. As a wandering nation, accommodating the needs of the UK Jewish community is a challenge, as the ebb and flow of demographics mean that often communities inhabit districts for typically 2 or 3 generations before moving to pastures new. This leads to buildings often not quite fitting their communities, being either a bit too baggy or a bit too tight around the waist. In designing a synagogue, our central architectural concern is to infuse Jewish concepts of abstract beauty and symbolism, memory and meaning, to enrich the congregants' experiences. We are committed to creating a space where believers can connect to the ultimate architect.
So what we wish to do, the three of us, is worship side by side, a real church, a real synagogue, a real mosque, and where each space touches just to give enough, to shift enough, to modify enough, so that we can share but still properly serve our own people.
We took the 3 axes, key axes. So for the Jewish tradition, it was the east-west axes, the arc placed towards the east, which was symbolically the direction of Jerusalem. For the mosque, the main axis was towards approximately southeast, which is the direction of Mecca, which is the direction of Muslim prayer. And for the church, although traditionally it would be placed on an east-west axis, Matthew was very keen that I tell you that he was happy to have it shifted so that it was off the east-west axis and it could be placed slightly to the north. After we sort of took the axes, we basically took the directions of prayer. So the Muslim prayer is arranged in lines, as it were, perpendicular to this southeast direction. The synagogue is arranged as, this was a synagogue in the round, or in the oval, as it were. So the 3 uses, the 3 space uses, the three sort of compositions are placed over each other, and where they meet, something happens to the plan that doesn't happen in each of them on their own. So there's a kind of an architectural or an architectonic alteration going on because of these 3 programs, these 3 functions that are being conjoined. These benches here, for example, which are used in Jewish worship, can also be used during the Muslim prayer, for example. Within both the Jewish and the Muslim traditions, there's the normative practice within mosques and synagogues of having separate areas for men and women. So this really is the core of the project, and the rest of the spaces, the rest of the building is enclosures built around that. And then we started to look at enclosures. So the entrances would be one here and one here. This area is an ablution area or a foyer, so people can gather, congregate before entering into the main spaces here. This is the kind of approximate areas that we have created for the 3 religions, but then obviously they combine into each other. And there's also going to be issues of iconography and sort of symbolism attached to icons which are required, and then other religion may not want certain icons within the space during prayer time. So we created spaces, sort of interstitial spaces, which can be used to pack things away, or the curtain which would be drawn around the space to cover things up and so on as required. So the space can be signified alternately as required. We're quite keen that as architects, I suppose, we don't simply want to create a space that works, or a space that is kind of functional, or a space where you can simply have either a Muslim service, a Jewish service and a Christian service. It's not simply about practicality. but we want to create a space which has a kind of symbolic power. We started looking at a few options, or various options of how the enclosure might be created. So we're at sort of concept stage at the moment. And this is sort of one of the first ideas, which is really a fairly simple way of enclosing the space, creating the sort of light openings, creating entrances on the sides, which again lead into that lobby area from where you go into the main space. Sort of preliminary ideas of what that space might look like, how it might be used. Here you see the seating for the synagogue in the sort of middle ground, and the church in the far area, and the mosque closest to us. As we enter into the building from the ablution area, so this might be the view that you would see, with the notional sort of structural tree in the middle here. And we looked at some different ways in which the space could be realised. So again, this is looking at different types of cladding, for example. So again, we're looking at a visual language which has a neutrality to it, but also a spirituality about it, which applies to each of the traditions.
Walking along the streets of London, you hear every voice and accent and language. It really is a sort of a true international city. And this project is very much born and thought of as a London project. Where's it going to be, I hear you say? I close my eyes and imagine it in Regent's Park. As a sort.
The fact that Royal Parks have said they don't do religion is another.
I'll get there. Regent's Park, I think, it would be perfect, and I haven't given up, I promise. I see that this structure maybe is the antithesis, the antidote of the Serpentine Pavilion in Hyde Park. Regent's Park is surrounded by a mosque, St John's Wood with its various Jewish communities, various churches just north of the West End, a series of universities. I think it would be sort of perfect for that.
As we've gone along this process, it's been very important for us not simply to enjoy the creativity and the novelty of our own vision of what multi-faith space might look like, but also to see what other people are doing. And one of the great examples and great partners for us so far in this process has been learning about the project of the Beit und Lehrhaus in Berlin, which is a very different but also very productive vision for how multi-faith dialogue and worship might occur.
This is what we want to build in Berlin, a house of prayer and learning. Basically a synagogue, a church, and a mosque under one roof, and joined by a central hall for meeting, for dialogue, and for understanding. The building will offer Jews, Christians, and Muslims a space where they can hold their service or prayers according to their tradition. Has also the shared space in the middle, which is the space for open debate and for meeting and getting to know each other and learn about each other. So actually what we want is to enable religious groups to maintain their differences and to be able to withdraw into their own prayer room, but also to encourage them to engage in dialogue and to meet each other in dignity and respect. We want a building that is a sign of peace in a world that only perceives religion in context of war and violence and terrorism.
I think there's a couple fantastic outcomes of the discussion that you're able to watch in this video. And one was the very rich and often quite intricate and subtle discussion that went on between members of our panel speaking from Muslim, Christian, and Jewish backgrounds about the strengths and the challenges that they see ahead for this project.
In scriptural reasoning, you have a small number of people from the three different Abrahamic faiths, but there'll be a common theme, and for maybe half an hour, you'll speak about the texts as experienced in your own tradition, and nobody will interrupt. You will simply lay them out. And it's only afterwards, when there's a chance to question each other, in a way to elicit what is coming out of that tradition, rather than to get straight into some kind of debate. And what I think is really good about this is that it's an architectural realization of that process.
There is a phenomenon that has developed over the years of what is known as post-denominational Judaism. It's largely young people who have come together over decades now for a large conference which is known as Limud, which includes Jews of Orthodox, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Reform, secular, come together for what has been known as basically either the Jewish Edinburgh Festival or the Jewish Glastonbury, depending on how you like to develop it. But it's been going now for over 20 years, and it means there's a whole generation of young people, you know, who started as children and have grown up and see this as being, you know, much more exciting and much more enriching than their weekly sort of walk to the dull synagogue of their parents. And what has happened now is many young adults are actually meeting together across the denominational divides and moving around because they don't actually have a particular home of themselves. And it would seem to me that this concept is something that would really appeal to that particular constituency within Judaism.
The concept brings to the table something which I think has been missing in a lot of the interfaith work, and that is living story. That is nurturing together a dream of commonality and mutualities, which will serve as a model for people who I think do represent a constituency in a community, but are without the requisite and commensurate types of models which will help them to create what is quite unusual type of hybridity that we're confronted with in the era of globalization. So I'm very, very, very positive about it.
I'm particularly happy that you have an opportunity to listen to the audience and their reactions to this project as we presented it to them. I think that's perhaps the strongest evidence that we have of the capacity for this project to generate productive dialogue and discourse between religions and about religions.
How would you avoid disruption of each other's services? You have a church service with hymns, you have the call to prayer for Islam, and for Muslims, you can pray throughout the day. People pray at different times. And how are you going to avoid people disrupting each other when you want to have quiet contemplation or whatever? I do understand the concept of sharing education and sharing ideas, but if you truly want it to be a place of worship, how will you implement that without disrupting the actual concentration of prayer?
One of the original sort of thoughts on this was the observation that many faith buildings, many churches and synagogues and mosques are really designed for their capacity days. And I mean, you spoke about sort of 1,000 perhaps on a Friday versus 30 on a Tuesday, sort of thing. And I think synagogues are a similar sort of thing. Yes, there are services every other day, but they are the capacity days. And ultimately are sort of underused, lots of these faith buildings. It probably has insurmountable problems, I think, with regard to being a permanent building and there being a parish community or a particular Jewish congregation, how it being their home ground, as it were, and catering more for those days of larger attendance.
Having finally got hold of the mic, I'm not going to let it go until I've said three things. One is, thinking about Nick's point about parish churches, I was reminded of somewhere that you will all know of, which is Rosen, which was the original building there was a pilgrimage chapel, not a parish church. And I was thinking, actually, if you were to configure this space around the idea of the common themes of pilgrimage within the different faith communities, then you have a rationale for something which is not attempting to be the hub of any given community, but is a place for people to come to as part of their pilgrimage. And I think certainly my experience of the Christian community is like yours of the Jewish community, and when I was a university chaplain, there were plenty of young Muslims in this boat too, of people who felt that their parents worshipping communities of whichever sort weren't scratching where they itched. And they are pilgrims. And somewhere that enabled those people still wanting to find where the scratch is or where the itch is in their own communities, this could be a really powerful place for them. That's number one. Number two, have you thought about the interaction between fonts and ablutions? Because they should both be at the entrance. I think there's something really exciting possibly there. And number three, there's this whole great space that hasn't got yet mentioned, which is London south of the river. As the Bishop of Croydon, could I just mention that there is no mosque in Sutton yet, at all.
Yeah.
There are plenty of spaces where Muslim communities particularly are moving out into, where there are as yet no permanent buildings.
Yeah. Maybe we could have a chat.
I think, for me, the narrative of accommodation, negotiation, seems to be at the core of this. And I wondered if you could tell us about whether things ever got tense.
I think none of us are dogmatists, really, and we're probably at the kind of, I was speaking for myself, and I think for these two as well, kind of the liberal end of each of our traditions. So it kind of, because of that, we're able to sort of make a lot of concessions. There may be people who are more embedded or come from different traditions or different schools that wouldn't necessarily make.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I think it should be clear. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. This project. I mean, it's clearly going to be a bit too hot for certain, parts of each of our religions. And that's fine. And I think, but hopefully, there's enough people who are interested in this and the conversation that this is generating, to find it a compelling and interesting concept and hopefully reality.
Similarly, we're looking at potential sort of crowdfunding ideas. We have got, even though we're architects, we are slightly realistic as well, in that we do see it being realised as a temporary building to start with, because we realise that the momentum and the idea has to be established, and so a temporary structure, which would be obviously much cheaper than a permanent one, which was over a summer period, so it doesn't have to be a complete enclosure, doesn't need heating and to be fully sealed and so on, would be the first stage, which could be realised really in within a year's time scale, would be the first stage, and then from there developing the idea.
It's very important that we do realise it temporarily before we try and realise it in a permanent sense. And to put real money to it, we thought we need $250,000 for our tent. And our vision is to build it in scaffolding and then clad it, as you saw, it implies from the drawings, clad it or wrap it, and then place very simple kind of plywood boxes into it. So that was our thinking. We really, if we get enough of a sense of support and enough people like this idea, then we'll start looking for the money.
All of us would welcome your comments, and feel free to get in touch by any means, maybe not knocking on our door in the middle of the night, but feel free to get in touch with any of us that are involved in this project. But if you're looking for the most direct and easy way to get in touch with the team of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that person is Rosalind Parker, and you can see her address listed here on the screen.